Going. Hope everyone had a good weekend. We'll get started here shortly. Really excited to get into today's topics. Going. Hope everyone had a good weekend. We'll get started here shortly. Really excited to get into today's topics. Going. Hope everyone had a good weekend. We'll get started here shortly. We'll get started shortly. Really excited to get into today's topics. Going. Hope everyone had a good weekend. We'll get started here shortly. We'll get started. All right. Let's dive into today's topics. Again, really excited to talk to everyone here for another episode of Bad Takes in Football. I am your host, Bad Takes. To get into today's topics, what we're going to discuss, first things first for me, is going to be the 5 topics that I don't think people are talking enough about around the NFL. So when I talk about that, just know what I'm referring to are the topics around, one, who is going to be the starting quarterback in New Orleans, right? I think there's a couple reasons why this isn't going to be isn't talked about nearly enough, but I'll get into that. But still, I think it's important to discuss, and also there's a lot to talk about on this topic. Another topic I want to get into is who's going to run the ball in Dallas. Right now, they've had an identity problem really ever since, I would say, Ezekiel Elliott. So we'll go in a little bit more as to who's going to be running the ball for Dallas. And again, another quarterback competition we're going to get into is what's going on in Indianapolis, the Indianapolis Colts with Anthony Richardson, as well as Daniel Jones. We'll also talk a little bit about Cam Ward, right? First pick of the first round in the 2025 draft. Not a lot of people talking about him and what's going on there in Tennessee. And then finally, from a topic not necessarily talked about too much, but I do find pretty interesting is CMC back? Is Christian McCaffrey going to be back to his old self this year? So we'll talk about that. We're going to talk about Terry McLaurin, his hold-in situation, and then I'll actually get into my preseason, we'll call them training camp Super Bowl favorites. So those are going to be the main topics of discussion today that I'll get into. Excited to get into that and plus many more. Again, feel free to leave any comments. Tell me any other specific topics you might want me to discuss. But other than that, I'll really get into it today. So first things first, again, New Orleans Saints, they have a quarterback competition there. And I would say it's not necessarily the quarterback competition that New Orleans would actually be looking for or are excited about. But Kellen Moore, who is a coach there now for the New Orleans Saints, was presented with the challenge of determining who's going to be a starting quarterback between second-year player Spencer Rattler, who I would say was a highly touted recruit out of high school. I would say didn't necessarily live up to his potential in college. We'll get a little bit more into that. But then also Tyler Show. Tyler was drafted this year by the Saints. Tyler was drafted in the second round with the 40th pick overall. I would say sort of flew under the radar when it came to the quarterback limelight that generally comes in with the draft and being in the draft. We'll talk more about that side of things with like Cam Ward and others. But Tyler Show out of Louisville is the other quarterback that is in competition again with Spencer Rattler. So wanted to talk a little bit about this topic and really I think there's some interesting aspects to this. And for you Saints fans, I think this is going to be an obvious discussion and probably not one that you're going to enjoy as much, but I think it's important to still talk about this. So when it comes to the Saints, there's a couple things to understand. So one, they had really invested everything they had into winning a Super Bowl in those last couple years with Drew Brees, right? They had invested a lot into his contract. They invested a lot into other players like Michael Thomas, the wide receiver, who currently is without a team right now. But they invested a lot, right? And what I mean by that is they essentially were playing games with Drew Brees' contract, essentially to push money down the line in order for them to be able to pay other players while still being able to be competitive and be a Super Bowl contender, right? So they essentially were just kicking money down the curb saying, "Hey, Drew, like we will be giving you this money. We're just pushing it to default years down the line." Right? They did the same thing with Michael Thomas. And again, they did this in order to stay competitive because you have to think about, cap space and, being able to put out a competitive roster on a year-to-year basis. And in order to do that, the Saints made moves in order to make it so that they were able to have a marquee quarterback as well as a top receiver in the league. Oh yeah, by the way, they also had players like Alvin Kamara, and then their defense was actually highly touted as well. Again, we talked about Tyrann Mathieu last year, or last episode, I should say, who retired. But they really did have a pretty star-studded defense as well. Um, so getting back into this quarterback situation, right? So last year, you know, the the Saints had drafted Spencer Rattler. They didn't really invest a huge pick with him, right? So we're talking about the fifth pick or fifth rounder. I think it was somewhere around the 150th overall, right? And so not necessarily a position where you are looking at a quarterback or at a player and saying, I expect this player to have an immediate impact on my team. They're not even, not only are they not expecting an immediate impact on their team, generally with the fifth round pick, you're hoping that they just are able to make the roster a year or two down the line, right? They're generally players that you're taking a guess at, right? You're not 100% sure if they're the right person for that position or for the team, but there's some things you like about the player and you kind of want to see how it develops, right? That's generally, I would say, how that works a from like a fifth round perspective, right? And to talk a little bit more about Spencer Rattler, I don't know if you remember, this was before the quarterback, right, of NFL, like the NFL quarterback Netflix series, but they used to have this series called QB1 on Netflix. And Spencer Rattler was on that show along with other quarterbacks like a Justin Fields. And Spencer Rattler was the number one recruit in the nation. He was out of Arizona, was at a highly touted program in Arizona, and he had already staked his claim, and he was going to be the next Lincoln Riley quarterback at Oklahoma. He was going to be that star-studded guy coming out of Oklahoma to follow in the footsteps of those like Baker Mayfield. And really what kind of turned from a amazing, I wouldn't call it a Cinderella story, but like an exciting, hero arc story where Spencer Rattler again goes from number one recruit to, a Heisman quarterback to the number one pick. That wasn't in the cards for Spencer Rattler, right? Spencer Rattler, he ended up losing his job his sophomore year to another quarterback that's now in the NFL and was a first round pick and the first pick overall in Caleb Williams. So Caleb Williams took Spencer Rattler's job in Oklahoma. And I would say that was sort of, I wouldn't even say that was the beginning of the end, because Spencer Rattler also was kicked out of his high school. He was expelled from his high school for an event unknown, not discussed. They're still protecting him from what happened in that situation. But anyway, Spencer Rattler lost, he got expelled from high school. He lost his starting role at Oklahoma. Then he transferred to South Carolina, of all places. And, from a South Carolina perspective, what I would say is, I'd say he had a pretty decent career there. I would not say he necessarily was a star-studded, prove that he should be a first-round pick quarterback. And there's a couple reasons behind that. First things for me would be, he still struggled with things like interceptions. His first year at South Carolina, he had 12 interceptions. His second year, he had 8, which is an improvement, but still not necessarily what you're looking for from like a first-round pick. He also only had about 3,100 yards both seasons at South Carolina, which isn't necessarily going to raise any ears or eyes from an NFL scouting perspective, right? You're in the SEC, so yeah, you do play against tough competition, but you are not necessarily proving yourself to be that highly touted recruit that you were out of high school. So that's Spencer Rattler, right? I would say he had an okay college career that turned. I think his name might have carried him more than anything else from that perspective, but he still was performing in a sense. And then his rookie year, he did play in 7 games. He had more interceptions than touchdowns, right? He had 4 touchdowns. He had 5 interceptions, and he had a little bit over 1,300 yards, right? So, you're talking about a a less than desired rookie season. Now, obviously, the New Orleans Saints in general are not necessarily a top team, right? They weren't a Super Bowl contender by any means. They were in the beginning of the season. They actually had a pretty good start, but the wheels fell off pretty quickly for them. Um, but wasn't exactly something he didn't perform to a sense where, as a Saints coach or GM, you're looking at him saying, I think this guy has a future for us next year, right? So that is important to necessarily talk about. Now, the other aspect of this, and the other player obviously in this entire competition, is Tyler Shough. Now, Tyler is an interesting story, right? There's a couple things about him that I find interesting. So one, um, he is your prototypical type of quarterback from a size perspective, right? He's 6'5", around 220 pounds. So that is an ideal, I would say, fit or size for a quarterback. But something that's really interesting is he is older, and he is a little bit of a journeyman, similar to, I guess you could say, Spencer Rattler, who transferred in college. Tyler Shough, he actually transferred twice. He started his career at Oregon back in 2019. So that's the other interesting aspect of this. Tyler Shough, even though was drafted a year after Spencer Rattler, he's actually older, right? Tyler Shough is 25 and Spencer Rattler is 24. And they're actually, here's the other weird part, is they have the same birthday. They're both born September 28th, right? One was born in 1999, the other was born in 2000, but they have the same birthday. Tyler just happened to come into the NFL a year after Spencer did. And to go in a little bit more on Tyler, like, for me, I'll be honest, he wasn't necessarily a quarterback that I had on my radar when it came to the draft, right? I think he had a really good Senior Bowl. I think he had some good workouts and some good pro days. And again, when it comes to having that prototypical style and size of a quarterback, it tends to help you out a little bit. Similar to the pedigree, and I would say sort of the storyline about Spencer Rattler being a great quarterback talent, having one of the better arms in college. I think Tyler definitely got a little bit of a nod from the NFL when it came to his quarterback size. Now, again, just to talk a little bit about this, right? He started out at Oregon. He played 2 years at Oregon, and then 3 years, sorry, at Texas Tech, and then he finished his career in Louisville. Now, to go into this a little bit more with Louisville and why I think this is an interesting situation is, I talked about Spencer Rattler being a 5th-round pick, right? Tyler Shough, he was a 2nd-round pick. And if you look at his numbers, one, he was in the ACC, but he threw right around 3,200 yards. He had 6 interceptions and 23 touchdowns, right? This is on a 62.7% completion percentage, so decent completion percentage, but not necessarily record numbers by any means. That's not tops in college by any measure. But again, it's pretty lackluster. And so you have the New Orleans Saints, who, in my opinion, I would say are probably a team that is looking for the future. And what I mean by that is they're probably not actually playing for this year. I don't think there is a single player that is on the New Orleans Saints that it thinks this is the year that they can make the playoffs. This is the year that they're going to get to the Super Bowl. Sadly, what I think these quarterbacks are competing over is to determine who is going to be their replacement next year. Is it going to be the New Orleans, highly loved, highly touted Archie Manning, who's currently at Texas, right? New Orleans native. The Manning family is royalty in New Orleans, right? Is he going to be the guy? Because really, I think the Saints are going to be a team that's competing for last place. They're looking for that last pick in the draft, or the first pick in the draft, I should say. But they're looking to be in last place because when you're talking about this quarterback competition, again, I compared both of them. They're both very comparable. There is not necessarily someone that sticks out to me one way or the other when it comes to this competition. If anything, I feel like they're both in a bad position because I really do think they are playing for their replacement and who is going to be the actual quarterback for the Saints moving forward. So, a little bit of a turn there from a take perspective, but again, the quarterback competition for the Saints, to me, I think if you are the New Orleans Saints, I think it makes most sense to actually try Tyler Shough, right? Tyler Shough, you put a second round pick into him. He is a rookie. He's probably going to make mistakes, but Spencer Rattler at the same time, what are you expecting out of him? Do you really think this fifth round pick is going to be the answer moving forward? My guess is no. You probably don't even know if Tyler is the answer, but Tyler's probably going to be your best bet of understanding if he is the right answer for you. So I think that's definitely important to kind of point out from that perspective is the fact that I don't think in the end it's going to be either of these quarterbacks. And to me, I think in the end it's going to be the first or second pick of the 2026 NFL draft that is going to be the quarterback of the future for the Saints. Second conversation or topic of conversation that I want to get into is the quarterback competition in, or sorry, not the quarterback competition, the running back competition in Dallas. Now, this is an interesting competition for a couple reasons. One, for me at least, every single year, if you are a Dallas Cowboy or a Dallas Cowboy fan, everyone is wondering, is this the year, right? Are they finally going to turn the page? Are they finally going to get over that hump and become an actual Super Bowl contender, right? You paid Dak a little bit ago. You paid CD. You acquired George Pickens. Your defense is a little bit lacking, I think, from a talent perspective, especially if you don't re-sign Micah Parsons and if that situation gets any worse. But you're looking at a quarterback competition, or sorry, a running back competition between, I would say, three actual potential suitors. It's probably closer to two, but there is another running back that I feel like is a little bit in the mix, and I'll get into that. So first things first, Javonte Williams, right, is the first running back that I think might have the best chance in Dallas to actually become a starter. And I'll kind of actually I'll share these stats real quick just to kind of show you what I mean by that. But here's Javonte Williams' stats, right? So first things first, he was a second round pick for Denver. This is his first year in Dallas. He was picked up by Dallas this year. To me, I would say Javonte had sort of what I would call an up and down season, or up and down career so far. And his rookie year to me was probably his most promising. He had an injury that really ended his season, his second year. I do remember that, and had a little bit of a bounce back season the following year. But the last year, I don't remember him necessarily being talked about that much. I don't necessarily remember him being that impactful of a player. I mean, 513 yards on the ground. you've 4 touchdowns. That's a playoff team, right? Bo Nix and Sean Payton really turned that organization around, and Javonte Williams wasn't necessarily the biggest part of that. I think that's an important aspect to necessarily talk about. And again, I think there's also I'll talk about this probably in a little bit more throughout this entire episode, but I think there's a reason why some of these conversations or some of these topics aren't necessarily being covered too much. It's probably because it's not the most exciting aspects, but these are impactful positions on these teams, right? Like who the quarterback is for the Saints is important. Who runs the ball behind Dak Prescott is just as important because let's be honest, everyone is going to be expecting them to pass the ball, and if they don't have a respectable run game, they're going to be in trouble regardless. And so you have Javonte Williams, right? The next player, Miles Sanders, right? Miles Sanders, he's on his third team. He started out with the Philadelphia Eagles. He was a second round pick. Went over to Carolina for a couple years and saw, I would say, a lack a lack of production and a lack of usage. He really fell off at the end there. And again, he's also competing for that starting role in Dallas. There's definitely a theme when it comes to these players, right? So Miles Sanders, he sort of outplayed himself at a contract in Philly. Philly, I think, realized that they weren't going to pay him what he was hoping after his final year in Philly. You can see there he had almost 1,300 yards. He had 11 touchdowns. That was also on top of having, you know, some targets from a receptions perspective, but he wasn't necessarily killing it. He only had 78 yards. But again, he's he had a good year there, and I think Carolina was really expecting him to be a workhorse for them. I think everyone in Carolina was expecting him to really help, I would say, Bryce Young in his first year as a quarterback in the NFL. They thought he was going to help carry that load. And he had less than 500 yards on 16 games, right? Chuba Hubbard outplayed him in Carolina. And so Miles Sanders saw even less production the following year, right? Last year, 55 carries for 205 yards. I don't think there's a single player competing for a starting position that's putting up 205 yards in a year, right? Let's go back real quick to Javonte, right? Wasn't that much more impressive. 513 yards, right? So between these two, you're talking a little bit over 700 yards of rushing offense last year between the two main competitors for this Dallas run position, right? This starting running back position. The last, and I would say, would be I'm rooting for the guy. I'll say that Deuce Vaughn. I'm a huge fan of Deuce Vaughn. Even in my dynasty league, I projected him just purely because I saw how bad the Dallas Cowboys running back room was. But I did actually draft him in a very late round of my dynasty fantasy football league because he's a playmaker. He hasn't necessarily gotten the opportunities, I would say, so far in the NFL to actually prove that. I'll just show you this really quick and, sort of lackluster, but, his first year, he had 23 carries for 40 yards. Second season, 17 carries for 70 yards, right? So huge difference in yards per carry, right? Getting over 4 yards per carry is super exciting. But on top of that, I think what's kind of interesting is the fact that even the media is actually talking more so about Deuce Vaughn than they are about someone like Javonte Williams, right? They are referencing Miles Sanders in this, right? But they're also referencing Deuce Vaughn and how he's impressing the team. So I think that's important to necessarily talk about is like who are these teams mentioning? Who are they talking about? And I think that's a good way to kind of look at, who are going to be the potential starters there. So let me caveat this real fast and just say we still have yet to play a preseason game. And in all fairness, preseason doesn't necessarily show and have the same amount of importance that I would say regular season games have, and I don't think coaches and teams put as much weight into what happens in these preseason games. But as a running back, that's really where you're going to be able to prove yourself, because in training camps nowadays, you are not getting tackled that much in practice, right? They call it thuds, right? You might hit shoulder pad to shoulder pad, but they're not going to wrap up. They're not going to they're not going to actually bring you to the ground. And so really it's going to be these preseason games that is where these players are going to be able to prove themselves. So I think it's important to kind of discuss that really quick when we go through things. Now, my thoughts on this. I don't think it makes. I don't think Javonte Williams or Miles Sanders are the answer, right? If anything, they both have sort of lost their juice, if you will, when it comes to being an impactful runner on the field. I think both of them have become less and less productive, and I think they both have lost their ability to be that starting running back. I'll be honest, if I'm Dallas, I'm giving Deuce Vaughn half the carries, but mostly I'm having him in as a pass catching running back. He's extremely small. First off, I think he's somewhere around 5'6", and he's extremely shifty. He is a playmaker, right? If he gets into open field, good luck catching him, right? And I think that's what puts him above and beyond like a Miles Sanders and a Javonte Williams. Javonte Williams and Miles Sanders. Javonte Williams, I would say, is a downhill runner, right? He's going to break tackles. He's best just going north and south, right? Miles Sanders, I would say, is a little bit more on the shiftier side, but he's not still. I wouldn't say he's known to be an elusive running back, right? I think he's a solid running back, but I also at the same time think he's lost a lot of that ability in his career. And so for me, I think it's going to be interesting to see what happens in these preseason games. I see Deuce Vaughn getting a real shot to be a starting running back for the Dallas Cowboys. If their media is talking about him and he gets the touches and the opportunities, I mean, he already proved it, like I said, in his second year. Very limited amount, 17 carries, but for 70 yards, right? 4.1 average per carry. That is what NFL teams are looking for. That is what is going to move the needle for these teams. Think about this, and it's simple math when you break it down. You have generally each NFL team has 3 tries to get a first down, right? And you have 10 yards to get that first down. If you're rushing the ball 3 times for 4 yards each time, that's a first down every time, right? You're looking at second and 2 or third and 2. You know, you're looking at second and 6, right? If you keep getting 4 yards a carry, you're going to get a first down every single time. The math makes sense there, right? And I didn't necessarily look at it too much, but Javonte Williams, right? 3.7 yards a carry last year. That's still really solid. And the same thing, 3.7 yards for Miles Sanders. So each one of them has that ability to get those first downs for the Cowboys. To me, it's just a matter of how much are you looking at them as your future running back, or how much are they just filling a hole for you this year? I think there's been a lot of people in the Cowboys organization, Cowboys fans especially, that are saying to themselves, why didn't we ever get Derrick Henry, 2 years ago? Why didn't we try to go after Saquon? They had an amazing offense when I would say Ezekiel Elliott was at his best. Their offensive line was at its best as well. And that's when Dallas was really the best at being the top competitor that they could be in the NFL and being a Super Bowl competitor. So again, my take, I think it comes down to a combination of Miles Sanders and Javonte Williams as the first, but I think Deuce Vaughn should be your third down back. right? I really do think Deuce Vaughn should be that third option, that third down back that can really open the field and change the game for your team. Next topic, the quarterback competition in Indianapolis. And this is interesting for a couple different reasons. So, first things first, Anthony Richardson was, I believe, to be I think he was the fourth overall pick last, sorry, not last year, 2 years ago, for the Indianapolis Colts. And if you were to really, I think there's a couple players you'd say this about, but if you were to create a Madden player and you're specifically looking for a quarterback that could both run and throw the ball, I think you're creating Anthony Richardson, right? I think Anthony Richardson would be what you would end up creating in a Madden football game, right? So you have Anthony Richardson, again, fourth round pick 2 years ago, 3 years ago, if you want to include this season. And then you have Daniel Jones, who was a top 10 pick for the New York Giants, has had a Pro Bowl season, has brought the New York Giants to the playoffs, but also still, in a sense, somehow has gotten, I would say, I would say not the most amount of love or credit, right? A couple things from that perspective. One, he is, I would say, he was in a market that is not necessarily easy to play in, right? You're talking about the New York Giants, right? The New York Giants are they're a tough that's a tough market in general, right? You are talking about New York, right? The city that never sleeps, and they expect greatness. They have a pedigree of success in the past, and so the New York Giants always expect that. Daniel Jones didn't necessarily work out for them, right? You can kind of look at this in years past. You know, besides really, I would say that 2022 season, he wasn't necessarily super successful. He wasn't necessarily being a game changer, right? He had eight touchdowns and 7 interceptions in 2024. Obviously that was only in 10 games, but that anytime you have almost as many interceptions as touchdowns, you're not going to make it, right? It was an obvious means to an end for Daniel Jones' time in Indianapolis, or sorry, in New York. Now, on the other side of this, when you take a look at Anthony Richardson here, he's actually not performed well either, right? I mean, last year he had more interceptions than touchdowns. He had 12 interceptions, 8 touchdowns. And when you're the fourth pick, you don't get time to be successful, right? These teams now, these organizations, they know what they're looking for, and players are coming out more and more ready to be impactful. And so when these are your numbers as a starting quarterback, you're not gonna they're not just gonna hand you the keys anymore, right? That is a fact. And that is why there is a competition, right? Indianapolis, even though they have Anthony Richardson, they brought in Daniel Jones, right? They didn't bring in a quarterback like that was already a backup, right? It's not like they just brought in someone that is a perennial backup and, they just know are going to be a backup there. They brought in Daniel Jones, who was a starting quarterback. He is going to a place expecting to compete for a starting role. And Indianapolis isn't a bad team, right? They have a pretty solid offensive line. They have pretty decent weapons, and their defense is solid, right? They have talent all around them. And also, they're in the NFC South. The NFC South is not strong. And so, if you can get Daniel Jones or Anthony Richardson to be a productive quarterback, I'm not talking about a game changing quarterback, but if they can just be a productive quarterback, a quasi just game manager, right? You're going to have a shot if you're the Indianapolis Colts. They are going to have the ability to win games and have a shot at the playoffs. There's no doubt in my mind when it comes to that. And so, for me, when it comes to this competition, I know that Anthony Richardson right now is showing flashes, and I've heard he's doing a lot of extra work on the sides. He's doing a lot of mental reps. They've shown a lot of tape of him being out there, not actually being the player in the practice, like doing the actual drill itself, but he's on the side and he's doing these mental reps. And I think that's his biggest issue is sort of the game management side of things. If he can figure that part out, or if Daniel Jones can get rid of the mental mistakes, right? I think they both kind of have the same issue. They're both great athletes. I think Daniel Jones was clocked as one of the top speed quarterbacks in the NFL, like ever. And so you have these guys that have the ability to manage these games and get you to the playoffs. It's just a matter if they don't step on their own toes. And so for me, I think I kind of lean towards Daniel Jones. One, Daniel Jones has already dealt with the scrutiny. Daniel Jones has been in a tough market and has seen success, and he's also seen failure. And for me, if I'm an NFL GM, if I'm an NFL coach, give me the guy that's experienced some challenges and had some issues in the past, right? The other reason why I'm saying pick Daniel Jones is I'm still never going to forget the time that Anthony Richardson was out on the field last year and literally tapped his helmet saying, "Coach, I'm tired. I need to take a breather." I have never seen an NFL quarterback tap their helmet and say, "I need to take a play off." That can't happen. That should never happen. Anthony Richardson did that like it was just a normal thing. And I think his entire team, I think his entire coaching staff, I think all the fans saw that happen. And I think that's really when he lost faith in I think everyone lost their faith in him in that exact moment. And so for me, you can give a guy like that a shot, but is he ever going to be the guy? No, he's not. So I'm taking Daniel Jones. Again, I think he's been through some tough times. He's proven to himself and to others that he can get through those, and he will just keep on going. Give me Daniel Jones to be that starter. Move myself back up here. Next topic of conversation, Cam Ward. Right? Cam Ward, first pick in the draft this year. And why do I want to talk about Cam Ward? Purely because to me, most of the media isn't necessarily paying attention too much to the Tennessee Titans, and for obvious reasons, I think. But still, at the same time, I don't think Cam Ward is getting the same attention that Caleb Williams got last year, heading into training camp and preseason games and the regular season. Caleb Williams was talked about nonstop. Same thing I'd say with Jaden Daniels, Bo Nix, right? I think Cam Ward is getting I wouldn't say treated unfairly, but I don't think he's getting the same amount of love and respect and attention that the rookie quarterbacks got last year for one really simple reason, and that's it was really Cam Ward and then everyone else when it came to a quarterback perspective. I'm not talking about just overall the draft. When it comes to the quarterbacks in the draft of 2025, it really was Cam Ward and then everyone else, right? You had Jackson Dart taken by the Giants, right, to replace Daniel Jones, who we just talked about. He's also competing and apparently is going to back up Russell Wilson, who is now a New York Giant. But this year, again, it was really Cam Ward. Everyone was talking about Shedeur Sanders. Shedeur Sanders ended up being a fifth-round pick. it was really just Cam Ward and everyone else. And so for me, I think it's interesting that people aren't talking about him as much, and I think it's also as a product of a couple things. One, Tennessee, Nashville isn't necessarily the biggest market when it comes to football and just sports in general. I think when people think of Nashville, they still think of country music and parties. They don't think of the Titans every single time. So I think that's part of it. But also, again, they weren't a good team last year. Like, they got the first pick in the draft for a reason. They didn't trade up to get Cam Ward. He fell in their lap for a couple different reasons. I think if I'm looking back and remembering, I think it was like the Giants that won a game at the end of the season with that could have ensured that they got the first pick in the draft, and they ended up winning a game, which hurt their chances of that. But again, you know, Cam Ward isn't getting that love that most first picks in the draft get, and I think a lot of it has to do with the quarterback talent that came out in the draft this year. And so part of me is sitting here wondering, like, is there a reason for that? Is is Cam Ward actually going to be that good? I know this is a different situation, different year and everything, but it kind of brings me back to the Kenny Pickett draft year. Kenny Pickett was drafted. He was the first quarterback taken. He was taken by the Steelers, I think, in like the 20s, early 20s. But he became the starter for the Pittsburgh Steelers. But he was really the only quarterback drafted in the first round. And so for me, when I look at Cam Ward, I'm kind of wondering, was he the first pick in the draft purely because he was the best quarterback and that's it? Or, did he actually like earn it? Does he deserve it? For me, I think there's a clear and obvious answer. I think he did, if I'm being honest. I really do. I really think that Cam Ward deserved to be that pick. I mean, I'm looking at his stats, and again, this is another aspect that I have a challenge with, and it maybe it's just me as a old school guy from this perspective, but he was a little bit of a journeyman, right? He played at 3 different schools, including Washington State, and he ended his career at Miami. But he had 4,300 passing yards his senior season with Miami. That's on 39 touchdowns and 7 interceptions, right? That is a great year. 67% passer completion percentage, much better than Tyler Shoks that I went over before, as well as Spencer Rattler's, right? So he has the numbers that say he could be a marquee quarterback in the NFL. The sad truth is, does he have the players around him to be successful? I'm not 100% sure on that part. I think they're really hoping Calvin Ridley has a bounce back year this year and is able to show the production level they were expecting to get out of them when they got him after his 1-year stint in Jacksonville. I know Traylon Burks broke his collarbone in practice. That's not good, right? So Traylon Burks hadn't necessarily done much for the Titans to begin with, but at the same time, he's an option for them, but he can't be an option for a while. I think he's gonna miss probably the beginning part of the season, and that's a huge thing for a rookie quarterback and a new wide receiver. And when I say new, he's not new to the Titans; he's new to Cam Ward. And so, getting on the same page with your quarterback when you don't have the ability to practice is going to be tough. That's going to take a while to get up to speed. But yeah, I just find it very interesting that this topic isn't necessarily talked about a lot. I think a little bit has to do with the product of the fact that the Titans aren't expected to be super successful this year. I think that's a big part of it. But at the same time, again, you're talking about the first pick in the draft. The final topic that I feel like isn't necessarily being talked about enough this year is Christian McCaffrey. Now, why am I talking about Christian McCaffrey right now? One, I think he is the key to success for the San Francisco 49ers. I think that's very obvious to me at least, but when I look at the San Francisco 49ers, I look at a team that lost Debo Samuel, who I think was their workhorse. I think was a main game changer for the 49ers. Um, they lost their star safety, right? And the other reason why I think this is important to really discuss is Christian McCaffrey. The reason why he missed most of last season, right? He only played in 4 games last season. He ran for 202 yards, right? That is that is the lowest numbers he's had in his entire career, and that's also including a season where he only played in 3 games. He had 225 yards in 3 games that year, right? So last year, 50 carries, 202 yards, no touchdowns, mind you. Um, he had tendonitis in his Achilles. I'm not sure if you've really paid much attention to injuries around just sports world in general, right? I'm not even talking about just football. Honestly, I'm probably talking more so about basketball more than anything. But like Kevin Love, or not Kevin Love, Kevin Durant, perfect example of this situation. Kevin Durant had the same injury that Christian McCaffrey had last year, right? The year that Kevin Durant tore his Achilles. Christian McCaffrey, he didn't. There wasn't like a specific situation that really created this, right? There wasn't a specific play or situation. This was built up over time, and for a running back that how I would say is in their what is it? His 8th season. I think he's in his 8th season. He's 29 years old. If you have tendonitis in your Achilles, I get that it might go away for a little bit, but tendonitis flares back up. That's what tendonitis is. It's like a reoccurring issue. And for me, I'm hearing all the pundits, all the people saying things along the lines of Christian McCaffrey is going to be back. The 49ers are going to be a Super Bowl contender. They're not going to be a Super Bowl contender if Christian McCaffrey can't run the ball. And I'm not saying he's not going to be able to run the ball, but if you're expecting Christian McCaffrey of old, right? The years where he has close to 1,500 yards rushing and over 500 yards receiving, I think those days are over for Christian McCaffrey. Sadly, right? I think he is someone that has. I think he's a great face and a great player in the NFL. I think he stands for everything that's right. I know he just became a father. That's really exciting for him. That's awesome for him. I'm really happy for him. But at the same time, when you're a running backs always have a shelf life, right? Like it's why everyone is expecting players like Derrick Henry to fall off. Um, Christian McCaffrey has sort of gotten a little bit of a pass. I think it's because of the fact that he just turned 29, so he's not at that 30-year mark, right? Everyone talks about being the wall you sort of hit as a running back at 30. The other aspect that I think is important to necessarily mention is he's had 1,300 carries in his career already, right? He started in 2017. He's got over 1,300 carries this year, like in his career. I'm thinking about this now, like what running backs would be close to that, right? Who might have more career carries than that? Let me just compare it to someone like a Derrick Henry really quick for you. So again, Christian McCaffrey 1,347, Derrick Henry 2,355 carries in his career, right? So Christian McCaffrey has a little bit over 6,000 yards. Derrick Henry over 11,000 yards, right? In almost just as many seasons. Now, mind you, a lot of Christian McCaffrey's stats also come from catching the ball and his carries. But I'm saying all this to say it doesn't mean he has a lot of time left, right? Like I wouldn't consider Derrick Henry to be someone that you can compare yourself to and say, hey, like if Derrick Henry can do this, I can do this, right? Derrick Henry hasn't had tendonitis in his Achilles. He's had injuries, he's had nagging injuries, and he's missed games before, but it's few and far between. Not to mention, again, it's not tendonitis in the Achilles, which to me is a scary injury. I'm hearing everything is saying that he's healthy, he's back. I really do hope that's the case for Christian McCaffrey, but I do fear that we've seen the best that can come from Christian McCaffrey. I am confident in saying that. I don't like saying it, but to me, I see Christian McCaffrey maybe getting 1,000 yards this year on the ground. He'll get some additional pass, catching the ball. I think we're going to see him closer to 1,200 yards total this year, as opposed to 1,500 to 2,000. I really see this being a solid year, but not the year that the 49ers are going to need in order to make the Super Bowl. I still think they have a shot at the playoffs. I think that the Rams have their number. I think they're a better team than the 49ers, but I say all this to say I think Christian McCaffrey is not back like they are saying they are. And so we'll see what happens from that perspective. I wish him the best. I hope he has a great season, but I just struggled to think that Christian McCaffrey is going to have the impact on the 49ers that the 49ers want. Next topic, Terry McLaurin. Real quick, just wanted to touch on this. Terry McLaurin has actually returned to training camp. Now, why is this important? A couple very obvious reasons. One, he is the number one target for the Commanders, right? From a wide receiver perspective. They did bring in Deebo Samuel, but Terry McLaurin is the guy for the Washington Commanders. He already has great rapport with Jaden Daniels. They've had some amazing catches and passes to with each other last year that got Terry McLaurin and the Commanders to the NFC Championship. But to me, what this says is it's a sign of good faith that they're pretty close to a deal. I think Terry McLaurin has gone through a lot with the Commanders organization. I talked about this in the past. He went through that entire transition of being the Washington football team after they were the Redskins, right? He went through the transition of ownership, the transition of coaches. Terry McLaurin was really the one guy that was always there. And he's a locker room guy. He's a leader. I think everyone in Washington wants Terry McLaurin to be there and be there for a long time. And so him holding in, to me, is really a good sign. Now, he's technically considered on the PUP list, right? Physically unable to perform list, with an ankle injury. And he will be working with trainers on the sideline, which isn't a bad thing. But, so he's not necessarily practicing with the team, but he will be there. And not only that, he's going to be working. Right, so that's a good sign for the Commanders. They're a team that I think has hopes to be a Super Bowl contender. They definitely have a good shot of making the playoffs. Right, I would say their biggest rival from that sense is obviously the Philadelphia Eagles. The Dallas Cowboys have a pretty decent team, but I think it's really between Philadelphia and the Commanders as to who's going to be the top team coming out of that. A lot of that will have to do with, how does Jaden Daniels respond to his rookie season. It's been titled and considered the top rookie performance of any quarterback in the NFL in history. So can he repeat that or improve on that is going to be a huge part of it. But again, good news that Terry McLaurin has returned to camp and is working on an ankle injury. So hopefully he gets his contract. I would love to see him get paid by the Commanders. I think he deserves it, and so, good for him, and hopefully that comes soon. My final topic of conversation, and I'll keep this really short, but I did want to get into this. I think it's always interesting to kind of talk about, and I would love to hear your take on this. But I wanted to discuss my Super Bowl favorites, and I'm not necessarily going to get into them in order, but I have put together, I would say 5 teams that I think have a decent shot. And so going through these, I'll first break them down by I'll break them down by I would say division or conference, and we'll go into it. So really, for me, from an NFC perspective, I really see it being 2 teams, legitimately just 2 teams. And for me, it's the Philadelphia Eagles and it's the Detroit Lions. Right. So going into this really quick, Philadelphia, they obviously went to the Super Bowl last year, so it sounds like a cop out to say this, but they still are one of the most talented teams in the NFL. I think ESPN rated it. I know NFL.com rated it. Um, it's either been the Baltimore Ravens or the Philadelphia Eagles as the top roster in the NFL, and that's after the Philadelphia Eagles lost a bunch of players to free agency last year. I think they also lost a player to retirement as well, a player or two, right? So this isn't necessarily a given that they are the number one team in the Super Bowl favorite, but they had drafted so well the last couple years. It seems to me their general plan when it comes to drafting is just let's just draft Georgia's defense. Seems to have worked out for them so far, right? And I think they're going to continue to draft well, but because of the fact that they drafted so well, they were able to let go of so many players, like a Darius Slay, right? Like, it's not simple to let people like that walk. CJ Gardner Johnson, right? It's not easy to watch players like that leave, but when you draft so well behind them, you want to give those players the ability and the chance to perform as well. And guess what? You're going to be paying them less at the same time. So it gives you more flexibility. So Philadelphia Eagles are on my list of Super Bowl contenders. Next, there's really only one other team from the NFC that I see being a true contender for the Super Bowl, and that's the Detroit Lions. I think Detroit has they had everything it took last year, right? One, I love their coach. I think Dan Campbell is an amazing coach. I think he's built an amazing roster. The one caveat to that is the fact that they've obviously lost both offensive and defensive coordinators to head coaching positions, amongst other coaches that were poached by them when they went to their new respective teams, right? But at the same time, they have the talent and they've drafted well, right? Again, they have the culture, they've drafted well, and they have the talent. I see really the only competition they're going to have in the NFC North is going to be the likes of Minnesota. I think Minnesota is similar to them in the sense that they have a great culture and they have a great system in place. Sam Darnold did really well in that system last year, and I expect J.J. McCarthy to be the same for them this year. Not necessarily going to be game changers, but I think he's going to be a great game manager for them. And so for me, if they can stay healthy, right, that's a huge caveat as well, is they dealt with so many injuries last year and still were so close. Now, they got knocked out in their first game of the playoffs, right? They had a first round bye, right? And so this was a divisional round, and it was the first game they played. They got knocked out by Jaden Daniels and the Commanders, but they were right there, right? They were missing so many of their key players, right? Aiden Hutchinson last year was like leading the NFL in sacks for like 3 weeks after being injured. That's how impactful of a season he was having before he got injured and broke his leg. And that's a tough injury to come back from. But if anyone can do it, it's someone like an Aiden Hutchinson. That guy is a workhorse. I know he cares so much about football and about football in the state of Michigan, right? Being a Michigan Wolverine and then becoming a Detroit Lion. I think that says a lot about him. But yeah, for me, Detroit Lions are right there on that list. From an AFC perspective, my Super Bowl contenders, I'll start out with number one, and it's the clear and obvious one, right? It's the Kansas City Chiefs. Simply said, as long as you have, I'll put these people in it, right? As long as you have Andy Reid, Patrick Mahomes, and Travis Kelsey working together, I'll even put Chris Jones on the defensive side. As long as Chris Jones is there, he's really what makes everything work on the defensive end for the Kansas City Chiefs. Like, they have a shot, right? Every game last year where Kansas City had a really good chance of losing, they found a way to win. It was insane to watch. As an opposing fan, it's annoying to watch, right? I think everyone here, besides being a Kansas City fan, is sick of Kansas City being there, but they deserve to be there still, right? It's the LeBron James effect, right? People get fatigued from it and they want someone new to take the spot. But Kansas City, time after time, proves that they deserve that spot. And so for me, they are going to be a Super Bowl contender and a Super Bowl favorite until the Andy Reid, Patrick Mahomes, Travis Kelsey trio exists, right? Because I still think Mahomes needs to have certain targets, and he has some speed demons, right, on his offensive side, right, between Hollywood Brown and Xavier Worthy, but he needs Travis Kelsey as well. Second contender out of the AFC, Buffalo Bills. I think this is another pretty obvious one. I don't think anyone is shocked by this, but to me, Josh Allen really proved himself last year. I think there's a lot of people that probably thought that, a Saquon Barkley or maybe even Lamar Jackson deserved the MVP last year, but if you really look at it, like, the Bills had no one on offense, right? Their offense, like, they had James Cook, who's a great running back, and then they have Keon Coleman, who is a rising, star when it comes to receivers. But other than that, it's just Dalton Kincaid, right? They have the ability to become, in my opinion, Josh Allen and Dalton Kincaid have the ability to become the new Patrick Mahomes and the new Travis Kelsey. Like, Dalton Kincaid is extremely talented. He made catches last year that I don't think I've ever seen a tight end make. And that's not even his strongest suit, right? That's not even his best attribute as a tight end. And so that says a lot about the ability of the Bills and the ability of that offense. Now, mind you, McDermott, their coach, defensive-minded coach, which is great, right? Because he's always going to be focused on having a strong, stout defense that will go along with Josh Allen and the offense. But Josh Allen last year proved that offense doesn't need to have the likes of a Stephon Diggs to be successful. He showed that. Stephon Diggs walked, right? He went to the Texans, and Josh Allen had an even more impressive year last year with less renowned wide receivers at his disposal. So to me, Josh Allen is a no-brainer when it comes to being a marquee quarterback in this league, and he's proved to me that anytime he's behind the helm and he's healthy with the Buffalo Bills, they are a Super Bowl contender. The last team that I really see being a Super Bowl contender, and I'll say this one is going to be tough just purely because I think they're in the toughest division in the AFC. Actually, you know what? Backtrack that. So are the Kansas City Chiefs. But the last team I'll say is the Baltimore Ravens. And I swear I am not just saying this because I am a Baltimore Ravens fan. To me, the Baltimore Ravens, similar to Philadelphia, similar to Detroit, they draft so well. Every single year they draft impactful players that make their team a perennial playoff team at the very least, right? Last year they brought in Nate Wiggins. This year they brought in Malachi Starks, really focusing on the secondary. Why would they do that, you say? Look at their division, right? They have to go up against Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, and T. Higgins twice a year. They have to go up against, now Aaron Rodgers and DK Metcalf twice a year, right? They have tough opponents when it comes to that. But they focus on all the right things. I think they have a more sure-handed offensive line, right? They had some question marks last year. I still think people will say they have some question marks this year. But Roger Rosengarten really stepped up at right tackle. I would say Ronnie Stanley staying healthy at left tackle was a huge aspect of them being successful. I haven't even mentioned Lamar Jackson yet. Lamar Jackson should have been and could have been an NFL MVP for the third year last year, right? It was given to Josh Allen. Josh Allen deserved it. I still think both Saquon Barkley and Lamar Jackson earned it just as much. But anytime Lamar Jackson is on that field, you have a shot to win that game. And so, with that being said, as long as he's out there, if he's competing in a Super Bowl, he has a shot to win that game. The Baltimore Ravens have a shot to win this game. So, I think Derrick Henry, if he can stay healthy, right, he doesn't lose too much of a step, right? He's 31 now. Everyone was worried about him at 30. He crushed it last year. If he can be even somewhat on pace with what he was last year, on top of getting back a healthy Keaton Mitchell and, having another year of a successful relationship between Rashad Bateman and Lamar Jackson and Zay Flowers and bringing in DeAndre Hopkins, right? I don't think DeAndre Hopkins is going to be that number 1 or number 2 receiver he used to be, but I think he's going to be that. It's 3rd and 6. Hey, DeAndre, we need you to run a slant and get a first down. That is it, right? Just run a slant, get a first down. He is going to be that, hey, go get this for us. And I think that's a huge, huge weapon to have when it comes to Lamar Jackson. I didn't even talk about Mark Andrews, right? Lamar Jackson's guy, right? Everyone, when you think of Mark Andrews right now, is thinking about him bobbling the ball and dropping the catch in the playoffs against the Bills. But he's still Lamar Jackson's guy. He's still an all-pro caliber tight end. He might have lost a step or two, but he's been an all-pro tight end in the past. You have Isaiah Likely, who's only improved more and more as the season's gone on. So, again, between that defense, who they've done a great job of drafting talent, and between that offense, Baltimore is my 5th most likely team to make the Super Bowl this year. So that's it for this Monday's episode of Bad Takes in Football. I really hope everyone enjoyed today's episode. I look forward to connecting with all of you. Feel free to leave a like, send me a comment. Let me know what you think of my topics. Let me know if there's other topics you want me to bring up. Happy to chat throughout of these live streams. I hope you all have a good rest of your day. I'll be back Wednesday, 11 a.m. Eastern for another episode. We'll start diving into the first preseason game, the Hall of Fame game, which will be happening this week, right? Football is almost officially back. I'm excited. I hope you're excited. I hope everyone has a great day. Have a good one.